Anybody have any issues or questions you'd like to discuss? Yes, please.
Okay, right now, talk about, they're talking spending cuts. His first thing he's going to spend is defense. That's what he'll cut, defense. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I don't support cutting the defense budget, and I'll tell you why. The first responsibility and order of business for the federal government is to protect this nation and keep our people safe. That's their number one and most important responsibility. And the defense budget in this country can be slowed down in terms of an increase, it can be reprioritized, it can be refocused, but I don't support cutting the defense budget. Now there's the base defense budget, and there's the war supplementals for Iraq and Afghanistan. As we draw down our troops responsibly and successfully in those two countries, some of that money will come down, obviously, but for the base defense budget, I don't support cutting.
I think they're pulling people out of Afghanistan, the troops out of Afghanistan, too fast, because there's been so much lately. Now, if you talk, and we said a prayer for the 31 that were killed, they were special forces. Guess what? So is my son. He just happened not to be there at this time. He has been twice in Iraq, once in Afghanistan. I don't understand why these troops, I know they're volunteer, but does that make them less worthy? Because some of their pay, I know they can't support their families on what they're getting. A lot of the National Guard, even some of the active guys, if they're privates and stuff and have a family, they collect food stamps and everything else. Their pay isn't, why are they getting paid so less? I mean, the firemen and policemen too.
I want you to know that, again, I got a record on all this stuff. Most of it. I've been to Iraq 5 times.
Just don't tell me to go to the internet and have a computer.
To the internet? No. I'll tell it to you here. I use priority-based budgeting in Minnesota. So we put the things that we thought were most important at the top of the list, things less important in the middle of the list, things not as important in the bottom of the list, on the theory and premise that not everything government does is of equal value. We got to say what's most important. And for me, what's most important is on the top of that list is the military, National Guard, veterans, support programs for them and their families every time. Every time. If you go look at my record in Minnesota, you will see the rewards and awards and recognition for the best programs in supporting members of the military and National Guard of any in the country. And it's third-party valid. So what do we do beyond what we're doing currently? For the folks who are in the military, and like I said, I was in Afghanistan last summer, been there 3 times, Iraq 5 times. The situation there initially was fully justified. The people who hatched September 11, 2001 were there. So invading that country and going to get them and defeating that capability and bringing them to justice was absolutely justified. Now we're 10 years removed from that. So what's the mission now? Well, I think the mission now is to finish trying to build up the Afghan security forces to the point where as we draw down, they can do more or most of the work themselves, at least in terms of identifying threats to us or our allies in the region, and defeating them. Now, I agree that over time we're going to draw down out of Afghanistan, but I think President Obama, if you look at his proposal, was a little faster than General Mullen recommended. It was faster than General Petraeus recommended. And as to the surge increment, General Petraeus wanted to keep that surge there a little longer, and for good and sufficient reasons, which he's been talking about or talked about on television, shared with me when I was in Afghanistan. So the president's timetable for withdrawal looks a lot like next year's election calendar. And I wish if it were me, I wish he would have listened a little more carefully to Mullen and Petraeus and brought down those troops, but a little more slowly so we could make more progress on the near-term objectives. Our objective there is not to rebuild or build Afghanistan and stay forever. But we do have one last increment of progress that I think he would have been well advised to follow the advice. And as to the pay of our men and women in our military, we got to set priorities. If you want to know where the money goes in the country, there's a pie chart of where the federal money goes. You color the red, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, interest on the national debt, and a few other entitlement programs. The red part is over the halfway line currently. At the rate at which it's growing, it'll be over the 3/4 line within 15 years, and almost all the rest is defense. There's a little line in there for parks, prisons, bureaucracy, EPA, education, commerce, all the stuff. So within 15 years, almost all the money's in that red part of defense. I don't support cutting the defense budget, base defense budget. So we do have to reform. If we're going to be able to afford anything else, we're going to have to reform the red part. And that's why when I kicked off my campaign, I said, look, time to tell the truth. And it's no longer just political talk, it's mathematics. A sixth grader can look at this and tell you it doesn't add up. And they're taking in $2.2 trillion a year, they're spending 3.7. So I just said, we're going to tell you the truth, even in Iowa. And that's why I said we're going to have to shut off the ethanol subsidies. I'm sorry, not picking on ethanol, I'm not picking on Iowa, but in fairness, we're going to have to look at all the subsidies. And as part of a larger reform, to eliminate or reduce as many of the subsidies as possible. And Social Security, if you're on Social Security currently, we're not going to affect you. If you're anywhere near eligibility for Social Security, we won't affect you. But if you're my daughter who's 18, her retirement age is going to have to go up. We'll give her 2 or 3 decades worth of notice. But I'm sorry, given the increased life expectancies for the next generation, the retirement age is going to have to go up. In the future, if you're wealthy, you're not going to get the cost of living adjustment in Social Security. But if you're middle income or lower income, you will. In the future, if you're coming into the workforce and you'd like to have individual accounts rather than the Social Security system, I think we should offer that. I think in Medicaid, we should decide what we can afford on it rather than autopilot spending, block grant it to the states. Medicare is a longer answer, but we got to fix that as well. And know that if you're for doing nothing, you're for letting these programs crash. Because in Social Security, in the current law, no more changes, just in the current law that exists, once it hits a level of the red zone, there's automatic 25% cuts in benefits for everybody in Social Security. So if people are for doing nothing with Social Security, they're for cutting. That's what happens under current law. Nobody talks about it. So when the Democrats say no change, well, what they really mean is 25% cuts, it seems. And I don't support that. So we got to fix the program to save it. So if we're going to afford to properly pay for the men and women who are serving and give them fair pay, those are the kinds of things we're going to have to do to reprioritize the money.
Well, I was just thinking, I mean, these guys come in and if they join, I mean, they're volunteer.
That's right.
So if they can't survive on what they're making, what's to say they quit volunteering?
Yeah, well, that's a real concern. It's a real concern. We need to make sure that our appreciation for them is not just
Well, my son's
words.
not like that. He was military since his first grade.
Yeah.
That's just.
Well, still, they have to have enough money to get by.
I said a lot of that, he says, I asked him about it, and he says, it's the way they manage their money, Mom. They never taught how.
They never
I
what?
said they were never taught how. to
Never
manage
thought
their
out.
money.
Yeah. Sir, well, tell your son thank you. We appreciate him.
Cutting taxes and repealing Obamacare, you know, all that's great to support, you know, I think most of us agree with that. But that can't be done without the support of Congress, without Congress passing bills first. My question is, what would you do if you were president, specifically under the powers of the presidency, to start bringing some of this about and start?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of things you can do. As to Obamacare, I'm one of the people who sued the federal government and President Obama in federal district court in Florida to have his health care plan declared unconstitutional. And the federal court in Florida agreed that it's unconstitutional. That'll eventually be in the U.S. Supreme Court, so that's one way it might come crashing down. Another way it might come crashing down is it shouldn't come down. We're going to keep the U.S. House as Republicans. If you look at where the Senate seats are, we've got a very good chance to take the Senate. You can't count on it, but it looks hopeful. So if we have a House and a Senate that's Republican this time, they better do what they say. And that means you'd open the door to repealing Obamacare. And then I learned as governor, you've got incredible authority if you use it correctly. The bully pulpit, the megaphone, the ability to get the public behind you. The president in the national scene doesn't have line item veto, but you can veto whole bills, and I did that many times, as I said, as governor. One of the things I learned is you draw lines in the sand, and you say, this is the rule, and you got to be able to back it up and enforce it. So again, I set a record for vetoes, and the Democrats would send me stuff, and they'd say, you know, we're going to stick this little thing in the back of this big bill, and he wouldn't dare veto the whole bill because it's just one bad thing on just 10 good things in there. I vetoed the whole bill. Pretty soon they quit sending bills like that to me because they knew what would happen. And some of it's working together, some of it's relationship, some of it's drawing lines in the sand, some of it's using the bully pulpit, some of it's hoping we get a Republican Congress. But I got all of those things done that I mentioned to you earlier, never having a Republican legislature, all of them. And so I know how to do this. I've been in this position, granted a smaller scale, but I've never had a Republican legislature.
One other question. Mitt Romney is also a former governor. And, I don't know how many of the other candidates that used to be governors, I think there's one or two others, but Mitt Romney is probably one of the top leaders. Could you compare yourself directly against?
Sure, I can just tell you my strengths rather than pointing out his weaknesses. We all have, like I say, a few clunkers in the record, and mine are fewer and less severe than most. I got the best record in the race on spending by far. I got the best judicial appointment record in the race by far. I've been consistently pro-life and have advanced the needle big time. I've been consistently for traditional marriage and have advanced the cause by co-authoring the Defense of Marriage Act, putting in the law in Minnesota big time. I didn't support TARP. I did healthcare reform the right way, no individual mandates, no takeovers. And if you're going to take on and defeat President Obama, we're going to have to contrast with him on these issues, not have him be able to say, well, you did it too. And so if you're going to prosecute the case against the president politically, you can't be a co-conspirator in the charge. Yes?
If you reformed healthcare the right way, what did you do?
Well, we did a number of things, and people's eyes glaze over when you get into the details of it, but let me give you the large version. I say this one tongue-in-cheek, but if you run a system like an open bar, people drink more. So you got to have some financial skin in the game in these systems. So here's some of the examples. And the broad point is they want to bring everything into government. We want to give people the resources and the freedom and the power to decide for themselves what they want. So our public employee unions, we're their employer, they're the unions, they were having a financial hard time keeping up with healthcare costs, so were we. So we tried a new approach. We said, look, you can go anywhere you want. Pick any health plan that you want. But if you choose to go to one that's really expensive, that has bad results, you're going to pay more. And if you go to some place that's more efficient with good results, you'll pay less. Guess what happened? 80% of the state employees migrated to higher quality, more efficient health plans. Healthcare quality went up, and costs were lower than the market average dramatically. And 3 of the 6 or 7 years the program was running, when I was governor, 0% increase in premiums. Why? Because now people are paying attention to what does this cost? Is it any good or not? Or the like. And they were making wiser choices. Similarly, we started paying providers not just for volumes of procedures. If this gentleman's a doctor, let's say I'm a doctor and he's my patient, I get paid for volume of procedures. And guess what he's going to get if I get paid for volume of procedures? He's going to get a lot of procedures. And now that's interesting. We want to pay docs and clinics and hospitals fairly, but we don't want to just pay them for how much volume they're providing. We want to get paid also for whether people are getting healthier or not, whether it's working. So we started to make the change in Minnesota to paying for better health care, not just how many procedures they're cranking out. I'll give you an example. In type 1 diabetes is a very serious condition. If somebody's undertreated or mistreated for type 1 diabetes, it can lead to very expensive and debilitating conditions. Organ failure, amputations, really bad for the patient, really bad for the cost. And so we did a survey in Minnesota to find out what percent of the type 1 diabetes patients in Minnesota were getting world-class Mayo Clinic level care. Do you know what the percent was? 8%. 8%. So we said to the docs, look, if you start getting more and more and more of your patients to Mayo Clinic level standards of care, we'll pay you more and get better outcomes. So patients got better health, they got better health care, we paid doctors more, and the system became more efficient because if you treat people better with type 1 diabetes, you avoid the more expensive, debilitating conditions down the road. There are many, many more examples that we did in Minnesota, but those are the types of things we need to do. And I'll say, look, we don't want the government telling you, here's one or a limited number of choices for your health care. You either like it or lump it. We want to be able to say, sir, if you want to have a traditional indemnity plan, that's your choice. Ma'am, if you want to have an HSA, that should be up to you if you think that's what's best for you and your family. And sir, if you want to have a high deductible plan backed up by insurance, great. Sir, if you want to have an HMO, good for you. Sir, if you'd like to have a concierge medicine program that you're particularly interested in, that's up to you. If you'd like to have a plan that has some alternative therapies in it that aren't normally available, that's up to you. So, and if you can't afford it, to the extent the government's going to give people help, let's give it to them directly. You know, put up some guardrails for consumer protection, but let's not run it through some big bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. My goodness, they can't run their way out of a paper bag. Last thing we need them to do is to take over more and more of the economy in the healthcare system. Any other questions, issues?
Governor,
Yeah.
you used the four-letter word jobs. Jobs in this country have gone overseas. That relates to the economy that we're in right now. I don't know that I expect an answer today, but will you have a plan to encourage that employment, those levels, to come back to the United States, so that seriously, I can go to Minnesota and catch one?
Yeah, that's a nice one too. Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit, and then we'll close on this because I know it's your weekend and I don't want to be disrespectful of your time. A question related to jobs, and particularly jobs going overseas, and what can we do about it? Just so you know, I grew up in a big, old manufacturing town, processing town, South St. Paul, Minnesota. So back in the day, this was the home of the world's largest stockyards and meatpacking plants, huge 6- and 7-story processing plants, surrounded by some of the world's largest stockyards, and of course all the sights and sounds and smells of millions, plural, of animals getting processed every year through a pretty small town. You can imagine what that was like in the 1960s. But in the late 60s and early 70s, those plants all shut down. And so at a very young age, I saw in my community moms and dads unemployed, not having a very certain future, worried, lost their job, not able to chart a course for to take care of them and their families. And in my own family, my mom, who was a homemaker, died of ovarian cancer when I was 16. My dad was a truck driver for much of his life. He lost his job. He had later become a terminal manager at the trucking company. But he lost his job for a while, not long after my mom died. So here I am, a young person. And my mom's passed on, and my dad's unemployed. And so you get to see some things in life early on. I'm not one of these folks who learned about jobs, in a book somewhere. The American dream for me isn't some theory or something I read about in college or heard about in some seminar. I lived it. I was the first one in my family to go to college. When all of this happened, I learned the importance about leaning into my faith. I learned the importance about the value of having a job. Phone rang, and it was the local produce department manager at the grocery store, and he said, look, I heard about your family's plight. You show up down here Saturday morning, 6 a.m., and I'll give you a job. And I went down there and worked for 7 years in the produce department and felt the benefits of having some money, and worked there through high school and college and even part of law school. And then I learned the value of education. I was the first one in my family to go to college. My brothers and sisters are all older than me. They had the capacity, they just didn't have the opportunity. When my mom was dying, she called them into her hospital room, and she made them promise they'd do everything they could to get me through school. And they did. And so at least one of her kids was able to get through school and on to college. So I know the American dream because I've lived it. So what does all that mean to your question? What are the ingredients to having jobs in this country? Number one, businesses need to want to start and grow here. A 10-year-old came to one of our town hall meetings, and I had him deliver a message to Barack Obama because he told me out in the hallway what he thought, so I gave him the microphone, and he said this: Governor, if you keep the taxes low, people will have more money. And if people have more money, they'll buy more things. And if they buy more things, the businesses will be busier. And if the businesses are busier, they'll hire more people. And if they hire more people, then they'll have more money. And so on and so on. And the point is, we shouldn't have to look to a 10-year-old to know more about the economy than the President of the United States. And now, what do we do about it? We've got a bunch of companies who've made a whole bunch of money overseas. They don't want to bring the money back, because if they do, they have to pay a 35% corporate tax rate in the United States. Now, this is a word called repatriation of foreign earnings. It's a fancy word for bring your money back and use it here. I think we should offer them a deeply discounted rate or a holiday to encourage them to bring that money back to America. It's sitting on their books, they don't want to bring it here. We could even ask them to put some conditions around it for job growth. And it's a lot of money, it's a huge amount of money. And by the way, it wouldn't cost our country anything because the way they've got the budget numbers projected, they're not assuming any of it's coming back. So it's not built into the budget numbers. So any money they get doing this is actually a windfall to the country and to the budget. So that's number one. Number two, I'm for free trade, but it needs to be fair trade. I'm for free trade, but I'm not for being a chump. And we got countries who cheat and do things that they shouldn't be doing. And I won't give you the long story in the interest of time, but we got to get our own house in order so we can deal with some of these countries more forcefully in terms of these trade negotiations and call them on it when they cheat. Now, guess who buys most of our debt in the United States? Congress takes in 2.2, spends 3.7, so they're 1.5 trillion short every year. The Treasury prints bonds to get the money to pay the difference. Guess who buys them? China and other countries. And it's hard to tell off your banker. So we need to get our financial house in order so we have the additional strength to be able to look them in the eye and call them on it when they cheat. That's another reason to get our financial house in order. Three, we got to make stuff in America. And when you go talk to the folks who do that, for a whole bunch of reasons, they say the load's too heavy here. Load's too heavy here. Some talk about taxes, some talk about regulations, some talk about healthcare costs, some talk about energy costs, but they all say the same thing: get the government off my back. Now, we don't have to have the same cost structure as some other places around the world because we got other advantages, but we got to have it more competitive in the United States, and that's what gets back to my jobs proposal I talked to you about earlier. And then lastly, we got to have people who are interested in and ready for these jobs, and they change. So one thing we got to do better with the country is have people, interested in manufacturing. And we got a lot of wonderful jobs across the country, or had, that were providing good income for a lot of people before the crash, that have gone away, or gone overseas. And we got to have a country that has job offerings for people across all life segments. And not everybody's going to be a chemical engineer. Not everybody's going to be a computer programmer. We got to have a diverse economy so everybody has a shot at getting a job that's suitable for them and their family. So those are a few thoughts. I'm getting the hook, I see. Let me just close by telling you thank you for coming. 1 week from today is the AIM straw poll. It is the first kind of official launch of the formal campaign season. Preseason is over. The warm-ups are over. This is going to be the first kickoff of the real deal. And I think you're going to see some good momentum for my campaign, but we need your help. Ames is fun. I haven't been there, but I can tell you that we're going to have a tent. We're going to have Dairy Queen Blizzards. We got barbecue. We got a great band, a Christian rock band, and others coming called Sonic Flood. I think you're going to enjoy that. And you don't have to stay for the whole day if you've got a busy Saturday. You can come for a little while, leave. If you need a ride, we can get that arranged. We got tickets for you. But it'll be a huge boost to our campaign. And really appreciate it if you can come and give us a hand at the AIM straw poll next Saturday. If you haven't signed up and need information, there's folks with postcards that take care of you on the way out. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you're here. Thank you. Well, I'm glad you came by. Tell your son thank you.
Sure not to come next Saturday, but we're excited.
I understand. I understand. Maybe you can come to the caucus. What branch is he in? Army?
I know when I talked to them.